Hey everybody, this is Jim at SP500chart.com. It's a few minutes after 4 o'clock here on the East Coast on April 3rd, 2013. And we saw a little bit of fireworks in the market today. And a couple of things that we talked about yesterday seem to be, we'll talk about it in a second. Let me just read this to you first. The website and the video are for educational purposes only, and nothing stated at the site or in the video is intended to be used as investment advice. I control lines on charts, but you have to draw your own conclusions from your own research and make investment decisions that are suitable for your personal financial situation. I'm not a licensed financial professional. I'm just a guy who draws lines on charts. So before we get started, I want to mention just a couple of things, because technical analysis does not always act as a crystal ball. There are times when it can, but when we're dealing with the channel, all that technical analysis really can tell us is instead of being a predictive thing, it's more of a diagnostic thing. So it's like you might say, for example, this yellow line right here. Upon approaching this line, you might reasonably say, well, it's bounced there 3 times, one of which is off to the left side of this chart. It's bounced there 3 times. Therefore, predictively, it will bounce a 4th time. Well, maybe. Unfortunately, channels have a tendency to pretty much crap out on you right about the time when you start to feel like you really got it figured out. There are some examples where that is not the case. This channel that we had between these 2 red lines actually worked for a fair amount of time after we had seen it, but not an extremely long period of time. What tends to be more predictive is the larger patterns that we see develop in charts over many weeks and sometimes over a good number of months. So right now, we're dealing mostly with channels, which means fear and trepidation all along the way, because we don't know when the channel is going to create a bounce or when it's going to break. So, that said, we saw a channel break today. We saw this little blue line give way. This line had been working for about 2 weeks. It had a number of tests on it. And unfortunately, we saw another failure of this horizontal line to serve as support. And to what degree do we owe that to the fact that we never got above this line by a really technically significant margin? I think we probably have to chalk a good bit of that up to that. There's a reason why they say that in a higher priced stock or in an index, you want a move of 1% or greater. And I think the reason for that is it's not that difficult for the market to throw noise your way that can make it look like a breakout, but then just as easily take it back. And as we've been discussing over the past number of weeks, it's especially difficult when we see, let's go to a 3-day chart here, when we see how all of these big, nice, wide trading swings that were made, 4 years ago, 2 years ago, now all of this has gotten squeezed down into this little scrunched up trading range, in which, in order to obtain a technically significant move, you also in gaining that 1% technical significance, you're giving up a good portion of what you would expect out of the pattern anyway. So it really makes it just tough sledding if you're an intermediate or shorter term trader. That said, you can see that it looks as if we are now pretty, it looks to me like we're destined to come down and test this line. And if this breaks, then there could be some ensuing ugliness. At some point, it's got to get ugly. It's got to. It's the nature of markets that they don't just keep going up at this nice little, well, we're going to move up within a channel that maybe only varies 1% at the most from top to bottom of the channel. Then we're going to give up 2%, 3%, and then we're just going to chug on up again, and then we're going to give up 2%, and we're going to chug on up again. That doesn't last for very long before you start getting into the territory where you begin to look for a more significant bout. Is that the word I'm looking for? Where you start to see some more significant selling. My signal for that would be a break of this line. And we do have, as I mentioned yesterday, we've got a couple of areas of support that could give us a bounce. We have 3 lines right here that could provide support. This line right here could also provide support. So if you're a gambling person, you might test this line. You might think, well, maybe if we come down and tag that line and we look like we're starting to firm up, that may not be a bad place to go long. But probably wouldn't stick with it for an extremely long period of time, because this whole shape that we're seeing here looks like, to me, we may be setting up the market turning over and forming a top here. Here's our all-time tops line, and I say all-time tops. The S&P actually has set an all-time high within the past week. But what this is the line that is drawn over the last 2 significant tops of 2000 and 2007. And here we are kind of flirting with that area, and you can see that when the S&P reached that in 2000, significant sell-off. When we reached it in 2007, an even more significant sell-off. What if we reach it in 2013? Well, again, we're looking at a line and we're saying, would we expect the same thing to happen? And I think upon approaching this line, I think you have to be cognizant of this level and what it has meant in the past, and the fact that there are psychological reasons why we would expect selling pressure to mount very near where we would be reaching that line. So today we saw this little new blue channel that we really just I just really settled on pretty much yesterday. Now I did have this bottom line drawn already, but it was part of what appeared to me at the time to be an ascending triangle, and it looked like we might get on up to the 1590s. But right now I'm thinking that's no longer a valid outlook. Instead, I would rely less upon this triangle, and I would rely more upon the channel. And that channel broke today, and I would expect us to find some support if the selling continues. I would expect some support to kick in about 13 points lower today than what we finished today, around 1540, or this ascending line right here. And if we get a bounce there, then I would expect this blue line that we broke today to serve as resistance. So where this had been providing support, I now would expect this line to be resistance. frankly, this horizontal line here, we've been above it, we've been below it, we've been above it, we've been below it. I don't know how much value that line is to us currently, so I am going to get rid of it. Let's say that what we are seeing now is a series of two channels, one which was very steep between these blue lines, that broke. Now we see one which is less steep, and now that broke. And this could be part of that process of turning this market over, and that should eventually lead to a breaking of this bottom yellow line, which then should lead to more significant selling. So you can see selling all day long. This top line right here certainly looked to have been significant with that strong sell-off at that upper level there. So guys, that is about it for today. Going into tomorrow and for the rest of the week, I think, as I stated yesterday, I would look to this line. Now, in the broader picture, what could we be looking at here? Well, you know what I'm going to say. If this is a top here and we were to break some of these lines of support, then we could be potentially forming another head and shoulders top. But we would only be about 2/3 of the way there, so that's premature. Right now, I'm watching this line right here, and I am also watching this line as resistance. So this line would now be resistance. This line may still be support, but we got to watch it closely because that line has been tested 3 times already. This would be the 4th time, and it's funny how right when you think you've got things lined up just right, that's when things seem to have a tendency to break. So guys, there's your video for April 3rd, 2013. Just kind of an ugly day all around. Oh, and by the way, what we mentioned yesterday, let me show you just a couple more charts. I mentioned yesterday the Dow Jones transportation average had looked like it was ready to really turn over and break even or less, what's a good way to put it? Any place where you draw a support line for this rising pattern or channel, no matter where you draw that line, today we confirmed a breakdown of support in both this rising trend line and this alternate rising trend line. We have a head and shoulders top here, which is not a huge top, the transportation average is already close to making the minimum from this top. But so that does confirm some of the weakness that we saw today as there was follow-through selling. Quickly, let's take a look at the Russell. We mentioned yesterday that the Russell 2000 looked to be on the brink of breaking down, and today we saw a significant down day in the Russell, and the breaking of this trend line is confirmed. Also, there would be an alternate trend line that I don't feel quite as strong about, but you could, if you started on this November low and the late December low, you could make the case that the Russell actually broke down in the middle of February, and this has just been one of those back tests that extended higher than the high that was prior to the setting prior to the breaking of this line. If this would be the proper interpretation, then the Russell was in a channel something like this, broke down, a little back test, longer back test, and now what appears to be a little bit more trouble for the Russell 2000. What's interesting is both of those lines that I just showed you that had broken would correlate to this line in the S&P, and this line has not broken yet. That's really interesting. So let's see if the Russell and especially if the Dow Transportation Average serves as a harbinger of what the future may hold for the broader markets. So guys, there's your video for April 3rd, 2013. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to thank you for your subscription and for your support.